in San Diego, California. I have the pleasure of inviting all of you into this intimate conversation with two of our colleagues. This room isn't exactly designed for an intimate conversation, so if you would have a preference to move your seat forward, I just ask you to pick it up and move it and not scratch it along the floor because it's really loud. And I think that I just want to frame some expectations and thought process about the conversation we're about to have. We may have time for questions at the end, which I think will be important, but we may not. I have absolutely no problem interrupting people, and those of you that know me well know that I don't have a problem interrupting people, but given the nature of this conversation and what we need to hear from our two colleagues, I think that it's important that we give them the time and the space to say what they need to say and for us to hear it in the way that they would like to express that. So if you have questions and would like to participate in the conversation, it'll just have to continue maybe beyond the moments that we share right now. I think that when we reflect, all of us, at different points in our life, there's maybe one defining moment or several defining moments that we can say, my life was this before this happened, and my life was different after that day. And our two colleagues sitting here with us had those experiences both in October and November, which they will say, my life, my community, who I was before that day is different than who I will be moving forward. We've invited them here to share their experiences, the way that their leadership guided their collective communities, and the way that they inspire us so that, God forbid, any of us will be faced with a similar circumstance, we can derive the strength from their leadership in an incredible way. For those of you that don't know my friend Bill Kaplan, Bill has been the CEO Executive Director of Camp JCA Shalom Institute. Thank you.
Home of Camp JCA.
Home of Camp JCA Shalom. In Malibu, California for 28 years. Most of you know my friend Brian Schreiber, who's been the CEO and president, am I saying that right? Of the Pittsburgh Jewish Community Center for 20 years. Deeply rooted in their communities, they both had significant events over the course of the last really several months that it will change the course of their community forever. And they're going to share those experiences with us now. Bill, if you could start, the name of this session is In the Moment. So can you share with us where you were and the events that unfolded right after you learned about what happened in camp?
Yeah, thank you. So I can't believe it's been like less than 3 months. It feels like 3 years or 10 years since that happened, that time. Thursday, November 8th, there were 2 fires that began in Los Angeles. One in the Conejo Valley called the Hill Fire, and one in the West San Fernando Valley, right actually near my house, called the Woolsey Fire. And the Woolsey Fire, they were kind of moving somewhat slowly. We were on alert, but not necessarily so concerned, because let's say the Woolsey Fire was north of the 101 freeway, if you know Los Angeles, and to jump the 101, we figured the fire department would be able to get the fire out. By late that night, about 3 in the morning, I got a call that some of my staff had evacuated their homes in the Conejo Valley. And immediately, it's sort of like that moment, like, should I drive out to the Institute? Should I go, I don't know, that said, go. And as I was driving on the 101, there were just flames to the right, and I saw the magnitude of what it was. And I got up to the Institute, and I have staff. Fortunately, there were no groups. We run programs all year round. We've had to almost evacuate groups that have been there when fires have been close. And I got to my office. I was just sitting there 4 in the morning, watching the news, waiting to see what would happen. We had about 20 staff, actually 29 staff who lived on like 29 people that lived on property, some staff with their families. I think there were about 20 staff there at the time. And we are Joel Charnick, who's the Associate Executive Director of the Institute, and our Camp Shalom Director. Direct relationship with the fire department, and actually happens to be the mayor of Malibu, our fire captain in our area. On the phone with him, not really that concerned, like this was going to be what it ended up being. So we were kind of in the mode of, hey, maybe it might come to us, maybe it's going to go west, directly towards the ocean, not the ocean our way. So we were just kind of getting prepared, and about 6 o'clock it jumped the 101, and the fire captain still was not concerned. There was no voluntary evacuations. At that time, we do have animals. We have horses, alpacas. We had to evacuate them for a fire before, so having that experience prior, we knew it would take 2 to 3 hours or more to actually do that. So once it jumped to 101, talked to my animal director, who was our horse director, and we started that process. And by 10 a.m., we were out. About 8 o'clock was the mandatory evacuation. Again, we still were like, oh, maybe it's going to go west, it's not going to hit us, or maybe it does come in, there might be a building or two. Could it, like, look at, point arrows to the health center, we would love to lose that building.
Yeah, right.
Great, that one too, the amphitheater, all the things that we're trying to rebuild, be fantastic. And even I have a video that I took when we actually evacuated the animals, everybody. That's a long ride, we could spend 20 minutes just talking about that, I'm not going to. But I have a video that says, here we are, was the last one out. A video that's basically, hey, everybody's out, the animals are out, we're safe, and hopefully we're going to be back here, and I think things are going to be okay. It was just kind of low over the mountain in the past. Fire has come over the hill. It just seemed like it was going more west and not coming in our direction. I even closed the gates of the Institute, and the fire department couldn't get in. And as I was leaving, we were caravanning out. Some people were going up towards the north fairgrounds with their horses. Some of us were going down into what we call Westville Village. Came by, the sheriff's department was coming in, and doing that. That's when when 0 to 100 mandatory evacuation. When it came up a couple miles up the hill, all of a sudden, walls of flames. And I should not have been taking pictures while I was driving very slowly at the end of our caravan. Joel was at the beginning of the caravan. And we both got down the hill. We're like, oh my God. There was one point where the flames were coming down the hill, and I was like, I didn't know I was going to make it out. I mean, it was pretty scary. There were forces being released everywhere, and it was just, that's when we realized the magnitude of what was happening. And by Saturday, we were monitoring everything, and we actually went down the bottom of the hill. They talked to the fire department. There were roadblocks everywhere, and they showed us on a thing where just about 2 miles up from that's as far as we could defend it. And that's when it really sunk in and hit us that this is not just the fire that's going to take out the health center. This is major. And it took out everything. We had 35 buildings destroyed. Everything. It's such a briefing. I mean, off our whole farm, I'm guarded, or Israel guarded. Our garden is in memory of Marlon Bennett. University bombing. She grew up in San Diego, grew up in our camp. That just completely destroyed. The only thing that's left standing is part of our motel adult housing facility, which we don't know what the extent of the damage. Smoke damage is there. But it really just, and it's like we were in the Woolsey Fire in Malibu. It is the worst. Our canyon is the worst, like a bomb. The worst canyon. The road actually from our stretch of road is still closed. And it's already 80 days later. We're still, I mean, it's horrific. And, but, everybody's safe. I mean, that's the most important thing. And then from that moment on, we just went into a different mode from Saturday. From Sunday morning, we actually met out at my senior management team. We met out at Brand Espartine Institute in Simi Valley. We're friends with the camp director. Said, hey, please use a room. And what was really amazing, I got a call Saturday afternoon to take a step back from the Federation, from the number one, number two Federation, checking in, how are we doing? And that morning, Jay Sanderson, who's the head of the Federation, came out at 8 a.m. to Simi Valley and met with us. And talked about what are the next steps. So we felt like right away we were extremely supported in the situation. That Sunday night, there's a Jewish high school in Toledo High School in Los Angeles. Actually, my son went there, my daughter's there now. And they were helping other people with the fire, the people that were displaced. Talked to them, and we actually did a whole community gathering there. Very cathartic for our community. We had about 800 people. It was live streaming on Facebook. I mean, thousands, 10,000, I think people watched it all over the country. And then Monday.
I'm sorry, but I want to make sure that we have time. We'll get into all of the community response in a minute, but thank you.
I could go on and on. I'm sorry.
No, it's totally okay. It's totally okay. Brian, to the moment in October.
Thanks, Betsy. And in front of this group, I don't expect the hardest group to speak in front of, because I think it could be any of you at this table understand the awesome responsibility that we take every day and how quickly one's life can change. Everybody gets sort of battle tested in this field, and this probably was the ultimate battle. And it's to say it's working over. I think it's actually we're 3 months in. It's much harder now than it was at the beginning, and it was hard at the beginning. I think it's hard because we realize how hard it's going to be to rebuild, and just how intimate this all is. And obviously, you're dealing with loss of life and a lot of connections in a very tight-knit community. First of all, for those of you, either yourselves that were part of J-Response or who brought staff, thank you. We'll get into that later, but thank you. It's still hard to count, and I tried to greet as many as I could when you started, but that was just amazingly supportive. And for those of you that grew up or lived in Pittsburgh, I know you have a special appreciation because you know a number of people, including the victims, so it's hard.
Where were you?
I was packing to come to JCC Association for my 3-month sabbatical, to build this talent white paper that we had as building block number 1. And I had a series of appointments lined up with Gully Cook from Leading Edge and Alana Eisen, and I literally had my piece. We had a meeting with our senior staff that Thursday, and some pieces on Friday that really were going to really lay out a pure sabbatical. 20 years in, Pittsburgh is an intimate community. It was time for me to sort of move away from the fishbowl of our community to try to provide some support for this field. And I was only going to come back to Pittsburgh once in these 3 months. So an apartment was rented. I had booked flights for my family to come to New York. We were turning this into an adventure. I was 16 and 14 at home, year-olds at home. So I had all kinds of treats planned for them in New York. And vacation week, Christmas to New Year's week was going to be a wonderful week in the city. And that's, by the way, it's so all minor relative to what we dealt with. So I was sort of packing away. I was down to about 20 emails in my inbox. I'd never been that low in my 20 years. And I never send emails on Saturday. I mean, it's just one of my cardinal rules, but I happened to send an email to my chief program officer because it was something that was on my mind, and I just wanted him to know because he was sort of going to be our point person. And he said, I'm going to go over the spinning class at the JCC at 9. So I knew he was at the JCC, which is somewhat relevant. And he's phenomenal for those of you that know him. And Betsy does, because he's married to her college roommate. So this is the Jewish world. 9:54, my wife's phone rings. I picked up the phone. It was a congregant in Tree of Life, who remembers the Tree of Life. My wife is the past president, saying, "What's going on? There's all these police cars. They won't let me in." Didn't know. A minute later, the president of the synagogue, and a minute after that, the immediate past president of the synagogue, that said there was a shooting, and people were beginning to arrive, and where should people go? And I said, just have them go to the JCC. It's about 4 blocks away. We'll figure it out from there. I don't think we knew it. I think we knew at the time that's what we were built for. I didn't we didn't know at the time what that actually would be, and I think we're still figuring that out. Once you become a direct responder, which is really, we're a first responder. I called my chief program officer, didn't answer. I called security. And one of the things that I would say that, because I want to make sure this is relevant for all of your practice, we did a lot of drilling because of the bomb threats. I think we were on potential active lockdown 11 times during all of your lockdowns, and we never got the call. We moved into emergency road and group text and security, and I mean, everybody had everything at their hands. So he didn't answer because he was in the schwitz. But my security guards wasn't. I just said, there's a major incident, people are coming to the JCC, you need to get Jason right away, find him. I think he's in the locker room. And he said that the security guard was like huffing and puffing and running down. And if you think about it, and you think about your centers, again, I want this to be relevant. A Saturday morning would not be the time that you're going to be the most staffed up. You're least likely to have your high-level senior managers, particularly on a Saturday morning. And I think one of the lessons there is that you always have to be ready for that. After the bomb threats, we moved to a much more formalized manager on duty. We've always had manager on duty, but we moved to a much more formalized version of that. Jason did not happen to be the manager on duty, but he was the person on site. By the way, I was about an hour out of town packing. I wasn't even local. I was local, but not that local. And literally, he got up, did his thing. People started to arrive. We moved into modified lockdown, and families started to arrive. I got there, so that was a little bit before 10 o'clock. I got there about 1 o'clock. We were in full motion at that point. I was on the phone with people all the way through. And literally staff people just kept coming in, which if you think about it, and I think one of the most beautiful things that my guess would be, if you were in a similar situation, and I pray you're not, that in essence, just like first responders run into the field of danger, our staff are running into a potential field of danger because for that first hour, the gunman was not captured until 11:05. It wasn't exactly on the news where he was holed up. He was in the synagogue, but he could have been in the neighborhood. People still came in anyway, and I think it's because of instinct. And I think if you're preparing for that, I think instincts really matter. And then I think we did what JCCs do probably better than any other organization, which is scramble and move rooms and just figure out what you need to do and don't ask questions. Because we're so used to setting up and breaking down and changing every day in every single room. That's exactly what people did, and we basically created safe, temporary space for family and victim assistance. By several hours later, all the first responders then set up shop because we became a place where all the first responders were. The FBI set up shop. There's a thing called FBI Victims Assistance. If any of you have ever been in a city with a mass shooting, for mass shootings, they have victim assistance agents. They began to come on. They actually stayed for 9 or 10 days. They were amazing. And basically, everybody begins to swarm in, and our staff really helped create both space and place for everyone while waiting for news, which is very rough.
Both of you, under different circumstances, mentioned preparedness in your original comments. Bill, you had mentioned that you had been through evacuations before. Brian, obviously, there's nothing that can totally prepare you for the circumstance that you were in, but given what had happened historically and the culture of security that already existed, there were things and drills that you had done. Can you talk a little bit about the preparedness and related to your decision making and the moments of being truly in that moment and knowing what to do next? What was guiding your decision process? What were you thinking about? Who were you talking to? Who were you not talking to? How did you get to that place, Brian? Do you want to start?
Sure. A few things. I keep trying to go back to that. Obviously, when you're in the moment, you're just trying to gather and get people set up. By 2 o'clock, we had our federation, our family service agency, the rabbis. There's 3 congregations in Tree of Life, very different congregations, which will be part of the challenge moving forward. And the congregational presidents and a few others inside the JCC boardroom. So families were waiting downstairs in our main floor, and we went one level up so that we would have both some privacy and give families some space and take care of their cares and start thinking about what was it going to take. A community media strategy. At that point, and we live in the world now of social media, we already knew by 2 o'clock that students were planning a pop-up vigil that Saturday night, and we used the opportunity to ask our congregations, I don't think we can be participating. At that point, we didn't know how many were gone, who was injured, who they were, and we knew that notifications would be taking place at the JCC, so there was no way we could participate in that. And we sort of developed a gut decision that 24 hours later, we're going to have to gather as a community and sort of very gently easing our way to the congregations to make sure that they felt a part of things. And I think one of the greatest challenges when you're in the community business is it's both our community's event and it's also the congregation's event, and you do a lot of nuance, but you also had to make very quick decisions. So I think they were looking for guidance, but they needed buy-in, and they needed that helping hand. We actually began organizing the vigil. We began the media strategy. We began the Israeli strategy, because we already heard Israelis were coming. I don't want to really talk a lot about the Israelis coming. It was not, in my mind, the finest hour. It was a tough hour for us, unfortunately, and I love Israel, and there's a lot I would do. That just was not the ideal moment in that relationship, from my perspective, and really beginning to care for the multiple layers of what was going on. And I'd say 3 to 5 hours into this, we really had a very, very good sense. In terms of our board chair, I began communicating with him fairly quickly. We put out a communication to our membership within an hour or two, just letting people know what was going on. We obviously had to evacuate the JCC. If you forget about that, but we evacuated, and et cetera. So you had to develop systems for who could come in, who couldn't come in. Clearly would not let media in, and boy, were they knocking at the door. And so we did not want them in the building. And really just beginning to work our way through. I think the second lesson from a JCC perspective is we partnered with those that we had the longest, deepest, and most intentional relationships, and you can't build them in a crisis.
Yeah.
So I think we reached a stage in those first 24 to 36 hours where we hardly ever gathered again. Everybody knew what to do. And I think we had that because we had already worked together between the three, and generally we shared responsibility. So the vigil was our senior director of Jewish Life and the Federation's Jewish Life director. They co-taught Melton. We put him in a room and said, get the vigil going. Communication-wise, our communication staff, Federation's communication staff, mental health, Jewish family and children's service, etc. So I think that gives you a sense of flavor.
Lessons learned. I think I've been there for 28 years. I've been in many fires situations, and Maxim was very helpful to go through some of those. But I think that if I could go back again, I think we did it right. But next time, I'll be prepared for like the worst case scenario. And I never thought, even during this crisis, that the firewall that would come through, the magnitude, and the reality is in Malibu, and kind of dealing with it right now, nobody really thought that it would be what it was. So I think in terms of that, and thinking that if it was in the middle of summer camp, what would we be doing? We have the drills, we have the preparedness, but again, there was a lot of lessons learned, like just as we went through the whole day, what we would do differently with the different types of scenarios and groups that we might have there be a little more intense. And when we can move on to our other sites and other places and come back to this site, we'll be looking at that and reviewing that and making sure that all those pieces are in place.
you were away and driving into your circumstance, and you were driving away from the circumstance, both of you not really knowing what you were walking into and what you were walking away from. Describe to me what you were thinking when you were driving in the car.
I could visualize what I thought it would look like, so it didn't look too much different, with the exception of who would those people be. And I think, to be perfectly frank, you have to move into your role, and you really don't have time to think and have emotions. Unfortunately, I went through a death at our camp 10 years ago, so I had an hour to prepare myself for that kind of fortitude, I would say, and your emotions will hit you later. So, and they're still hitting, and it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay because it's going to come out at different times, and we still see that with people all the time. So, the scene was not dramatically different than I intended, and I literally, in my mind, driving back, my wife drove, so I could begin putting my playbook together. The phone just rang constantly, so we would be halfway on the phone and halfway writing. I went back, I had my laptop, I went back to the playbook that we had used at the death at camp, and the 20 things, and we used it as our checklist. And Federation had not been through something like that, so they were looking for partnership and guidance. So they clearly were also prepared. They were the front spokespeople for this event, and extremely good at that. They were really excellent public spokespeople for the community, and it's absolutely important not to be fighting over attention, because I think that would have really damaged this scenario if everybody was fighting for attention. There was still too much anger and shock. So I think for ours, there's so many multiple parties involved that I think that was all part of it. There's also a phenomenal director of community security that was able to play a pretty significant role, and we deferred to him on security decisions, or at least in partnership.
So you're driving away. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm driving away with the two Tauras in my car. I'm driving out, and I mentioned before, as I got up the hill, that's when I realized the magnitude of the firewall that I was going through. And then driving down, and then actually driving around to where I live in the West San Fernando Valley, looking at my neighborhood up in the hill burning as well. I just left one fire, and I'm here at the other end of the fire that kind of sparked up again. And realizing that, and as I got down the hill, I got an email from Julie Platt, who is the chair of the Jewish Federation in LA, also the chair of the Foundation for Jewish Camp, and to Doug Lynn, and which are all of our temple camps, saying, hey, how are you guys doing, whatever, and Doug responding, oh, I think we're going to be okay, it's not really near us, and I'm like, oh, you don't need it, and I email back, it's heading, if it's coming my way, you're the next canyon over, it's going to you, and unfortunately, their camps, Hillcrest and Hilltop, were both destroyed as well. And that's when I realized, coming down the hill, that this is bigger than what I thought it was going to be. And I was a camper there. Our camp director was a camper. This is my kids grew up at camp. My sisters grew up at camp. This is our world. 28 years of all the work we put in there, and knowing what in a day, this is gone. And that's when it sort of just sunk in and hit. And then the reality is you just go into crisis mode. Just how do we deal with this?
So part of crisis mode, which a lot of us learned during the period of the bomb threats, is your attempts to control the narrative. And what that communication piece looks like. Brian, you mentioned briefly the press trying to knock down the door. How did you attempt to get in front of that to control the narrative? Were you able to? And what were the most important things, do you think, in those initial moments and really beyond in your communication strategy that helped share the message and the story that you felt people needed to hear?
It's funny. It's probably one of the. Even though we spent time developing communication protocols, we knew this was not something that we could have any ability to control the communications message. It was going to be broadcast. I would say, for the most part, I think most of the information was accurate. It isn't completely accurate. They start releasing information on victims. They weren't 100% right. That creates a whole other sense of things, and wrong information or details. So you sort of have to separate that. I think, to be perfectly frank, it was really about, our goal was about our community.
Right.
Our goal was about the victims, and we would let the marketing and messaging take care of itself. Our job was to do the best work that we could. I think to this day, it's continued that way, and I think it's taken me a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks to actually see the story the way all of you saw the story. We didn't have time to see the story, we were living the story. And I think the greatest challenge, and I'm sure it's actually similar in the LA area, you are at 30,000 feet and you're at 3 feet. That's never gone away from this situation. And as executives, we are there to provide the 30,000-foot view, the strategy, the overall game plan. This literally tested both at the same time, every minute of every day, and still does. I think that's what makes this both so incredibly holy and gratifying, and so intensely personal and difficult. It's just, there's just no separating from either one, except that some people have to stay at 30,000 feet. And, you know, and luckily most people don't have to be there. They can function at 3 feet, and we need them to be at 3 feet. As executives, we have to still be thinking about the higher purpose, the most important goals, and not lose sight of the direct victims. In our community, that's easy. 2 of the people that were killed worked for the JCC, had relatives that worked for the JCC. We had a number of members. I knew most of the victims. It didn't take a lot of work to really feel for those victims. And maybe one of the most gratifying things is I built different relationships with people with whom I didn't know, family members of victims who I did not know, who I have a whole different, very deep, intimate relationship through incredible loss that literally started in the first hours of the event. You're sitting there waiting for information, and you're just trying to pass the time with people. There'll be nothing quite like this, I hope, in my career after this.
So one of our challenges is that we didn't have access to the property. We didn't know fully the magnitude of what was actually happening. Literally what we fully knew was probably about 10 days later. I mean, we had, and it was also, you know, what's the narrative, what are we putting out there? And we had different pieces of it, and we made the decision we wanted to control the narrative. Especially learning from, just to take a step back, the year before, Camp Newman in Santa Rosa, the J Camp had the similar experience completely destroyed. And it's interesting about relationships. And Avi Lewinson, where are you? Okay, so Avi was the director of Camp Shalom years ago. I hired Ruben. Ruben hired me. I was Ruben's assistant director. So right away, we had all the experience from Ruben. You know, what was going to happen next in terms of the marketing pieces and some of the things in terms of putting the images out. And they were very specific about putting their Star of David image out that this survived the fire, and Wilshire Boulevard had the menorah that survived the fire, and we had our old van that survived the fire. That was like the thing that we had. It really wasn't that exciting, and we were trying to figure out how we were keeping it not to freak the kids out, and also to know what we knew and be honest and transparent with people and what we knew. And so we started getting images. We had someone that used to work for us from had the press pass. He was our video specialist years ago, who actually wanted to put stuff out on social media, his social media. We're like, no, wait, we want to be able to, it was very important, just the bottom line was for us to control the narrative. We didn't exactly know everything that was going on either. And we slowly released the images over a period of time, and that was really key. It worked. It worked well. The big one mistake is that I look back and especially with our staff. Remember, many of our staff lost their homes, lost their stuff. Fortunately, one building, there's 6 staff lived in, they didn't lose their stuff, but they lost their homes. So this is very traumatic for them, and there was one moment, again, everything was moving so fast. This is even like a week later, things are still moving so fast, where we released pictures without sending it to them first. And they flipped out on us. We corrected it, we apologized, we were upfront with them. But that was just one of the moments that we realized that we have to think about our staff who is going through this trauma themselves and wanting to be part of that inner circle before it went out to the public. So
We're dealing with that every day right now, inner circle and different ripple effects, and that's will continue to be a significant issue in Pittsburgh, from the immediate members of the family to those that were on site, all the way through community. And understanding the layers and the ripples is going to be very, very important, both for healing as well as victimization. And that's, I think, the other challenge at 30,000 feet and 3 feet, which is for some, not for all, for some of the immediate family members, it's hard for them to imagine a community feeling victimized by this. And I know that you feel that because you know that your own centers, people in the Jewish community feel that sense of heightenedness. It's very hard for a family member of a victim to actually understand this situation in a community or a national context. They are the victim, and you can never minimize that for them, and yet you have to move forward with different layers, and that's going to be a very nuanced and challenging journey for our community.
It's really
I just add an unrelated piece, because I want to keep going to applicability for centers. Two things that, as I think about takeaways that could be really helpful to save lives. And I know many centers do this, and if you don't do one fast, either on your own or with other Jewish partners or general partners, either ALICE or Run, Hide, Fight training, even the most simple training, people that ran away survived, people that didn't. And that's incredibly simple, and it's very hard to celebrate a situation when you lose 11 individuals, but easily, without some advanced training, 25 or 30 could have been killed, and it very easily could have happened. One thing that changed, and this is something else for your communities, our rabbi had never carried a cell phone with him. He had gone through security training. He had, some of you on the board heard him, but he had a cell phone. He was the 911 caller. He was the 911 caller for 1 hour. He knew to run away. He tried to get people with him. And he was the person that had to stay on the line with 911 very quietly during this entire event. If he didn't have a cell phone, who knows how long it would have been before a 911 call came, and how many more lives would have been lost. So I share that with you. I walk into synagogue every week now proudly. I used to hide it in my pocket. It's out there. And I would suggest that just in case of emergency, we do that. The Run, Hide, Fight. And the other piece, not stop the bleed, but one thing that we actually practiced as a community last January, a year ago, was an active shooter drill with public safety officials and emergency EMS, where they actually brought in, we actually practiced providing medical treatment for injured victims in what they called a warm zone, where the shooter was not in an immediate area, but was not apprehended yet. And in old days of active shooters, you would not tend to wounded victims until the shooter was apprehended. There are several people alive today because medical assistance was provided for people in a warm zone, and we practiced it. So I just wanted to give you a couple of takeaways, and don't wait for EMS, to contact you. You can contact them. Don't wait for your federation to organize it. Be there. It's only because we live in a world where there are so many mass shootings, and that may be important whether you're in a JCC or a movie theater or a school or a mall, you name it. It's still very hard to fathom the kind of society we live in.
I want to add one thing that we learned too, and for the camps especially, but for everybody. We've had a satellite phone for years. We pay like $50 a month, and we're like, oh, what a waste, what a waste, what a waste. There was, as mentioned before, by 8 a.m., everything was cut off, the electrical was cut off. We have like a it always works. It did not work. And we're like, oh, and then we're like, oh, we have the satellite phone. So that's when we're up at our horse arena, that's where we're staging everything. We were having communications. We had, besides like on the radio, we turned the car radio on, we didn't know what was going on in the outside world. And in this case, again, from past experience, there was a fire department, the sheriff's department been around. This was a massive situation. Nobody was around. There was no emergency, no one contacting us, coming by. So having the satellite phone was key, really critical.
So tell me about the thing that you will spend the rest of your days trying to forget, and tell me about the thing that you hope to always remember.
I'll do the remember. I don't think I can say the forget thing without crying. So I don't think I'll have to get to that one. I'll maybe try to do that privately. I'll remember the outpouring of love from everyone. I'll remember that our staff acted as if it was an attack on them, whether they were Jewish staff or non-Jewish staff. They were so part of the family. It affirmed everything about humanity in a very, very dark moment, and has continued to. My greatest fear in the early days after is that this would change the narrative of our Jewish community to something like, the world was always out to get us. See, I told you so. Absolute opposite. Absolute opposite. And I'll remember that, because that's what we're drawing strength upon right now. There'll be a lot of peaks and valleys. There'll be a lot of nuances. We've done a lot of faith-based work. We actually talked about that at the biennial when we talked about our Center for Loving Kindness. We have a lot of work with clergy that we've begun for several years. We're getting very deep into this issue of Black Lives Matter and Jewish Lives Matter with teens and with adults, etc. And it is highly nuanced and fairly charged, and just being able to have a civil conversation around this is challenging, but very real. So I think there's a lot there, but we're prepared for that. And I think part of that was the response was absolutely amazing. And we saw, I think, people at their finest in their finest hours. And the things I can't forget are going to be too personal and difficult.
Wow. I just think sort of just goes through my mind always every few days, just like that day, the moment, just going through it. I mean, again, it was buildings, but for me, it was like a culture, like a way of life. We had just reached, we'd been through other different crises, financial crises. Our agency in LA, we went bankrupt, we bust, and we went independent 13 years ago. And we just, like, literally at the moment of like, wow, we're moving on to the next stage of this. And just, in a day, it's just gone. And there's so much, just going through that day, thinking about, we had actually a little bit of time to, we got our server out, we got other stuff, but there's so much memorabilia. So much things that I lost all in my office, like all my phones, all the things, kids, letters, and just all these different things, and all of our staff did the same thing. And I just feel like, what I just won't forget is like we were just at this really great place, and it was amazing, and then it's never gonna be the same. And I said that to my staff in our staff meeting, like, a few weeks later, that no matter what, it's not gonna be the same. The culture, the staff, our relationships with each other, the families, it's just gonna be different. And it actually, at the end of the day, it's going to be better. It's never going to be what it was at that moment. Our life has changed, and we have to acknowledge that. And then now we have to look at our attitude. So it's, a few years ago when we didn't own our property, it was owned by the old JCC people, and there was an issue that happened 3 years ago. And my passport president said, adversity leads to opportunity. Made a proposal, and they actually turned the property to us 3 years ago. Thank God. Now that's a blessing, because it would have been a whole different situation now. And I might not be in this room and in this field. I might be dealing with a whole different situation. That would be now adversity leads to opportunity. So are we going to look at it from the lens of, are we going to go and like, wow, how do we make lemonade? You know, how do we do this? How do we move forward with this?
So obviously, 5,779 years of being at the precipice of survival to resilience is the Jewish story, but each of you are living that in a totally different way with really still very raw and open wounds because it's only days that we're talking about and months, not years. We as a community began some response to your communities and showing our support and our efforts to be able to do that. This was important to me to make this an intimate conversation about us and the support that we need to be not to your communities but to actually you, the two of you, and the things that you felt and needed. What do you need from us?
I'll tell you what I got. I'll tell you this. This is being part of JCC Association. I tell you this is how I got through. One of the main things that got me personally through this crisis, and I wish he were here and said I know, is Jerome. So just so you know, every day from the moment of the crisis, Jerome called me and checked in. He was my therapist for all the way through November 9th through I went on vacation December 21st. Every single day you call me, you would text me first and say, is this a good time? Sometimes I would say, no, I got to deal with this crap right now. Let's talk at 4:30 or at the end of the day. And I got to tell you, that was key. I mean, feeling part of this and what he did for me. Because there were times I'd be on the phone with somebody and like pulling my hair out and he'd bring me back in. And I think it was really critical. So I'd say like, it's actually already been done. And I thank Jerome and JCC Association for that. And I know also Jody and Jen came out, took our whole staff out to lunch. Were there for us, and Jody helped us find, we actually have a site for the next 2 years for 4 months at a time, which is amazing. And Jody was out there and helped us make the decision. We value her opinion. And so that's been, and just the emails and the, just caring about our situation.
I'd say ditto in a lot of ways. For so many reached out, which I so appreciate, and gave me space, which I maybe appreciate even more. I think I got 9,500 emails in 30 days. It took me all the way until the end of the year to even get through all of them. And I'm the person that responds to every email within 24 hours and much often earlier. That record got lost. Now I can start a new one. But no way. Jerome was amazing. He was in Pittsburgh 3 times. That created a very different face for the association. And Jay Response, which people have said, does it really make a difference? Did it not make a difference? I think at the beginning we were so worn out that we just said, fine, what's another thing? But I think that after the first couple of times we sort of got our bearings, I think it got increasingly special. One is we figured out how to use people differently because we were in an unusual situation. Like if they had put a call out and said, we're ready to start cleaning up and we need 50 JC volunteers to dig out X, Y, and Z at the camp, I think you can sort of picture that because some of us that have been around a while, we did that in New Orleans with Habitat and things like that, so you can sort of picture that. It's not like I can take a vacation day for you to be the exec for the day. I mean, it's just not going to play out that way. It's our early childhood teachers needed a break, but there's so many licensing requirements and files that we couldn't give those people a break. So we had to figure out the right roles. But I think what we gave people the opportunity to was to tell a story, was to get deeper in the staff. And our staff were able to see that so many different JCCs cared about who we were. And an opportunity for them to really be proud Pittsburghers. People are very hospitable in Pittsburgh. They're very Midwestern friendly. It actually gave them a release. So I think part of the lesson for J Response is going to be that as J Response develops, you're going to have to be in the moment with the community. And it means that every act of kindness may not be, you've been there for eight hours, you may only have one hour that's really productive. which is one of the J responders from Peninsula. I mean, that's a long way. So she came in on a Friday, stayed through Monday. And she's the innovation officer, and she started talking about some of the work we're doing. And one of the survivors, who is the daughter-in-law, but the family representative of one of the victims, the way she's trying to deal with her grief is actually through a program that she's calling Two for Seder, where she believes that if hate is the cause of anti-Semitism and a lack of knowledge, it's a commandment that all who are hungry come to our Seder table. So her idea is to bring two non-Jewish people, maybe strangers, maybe not, to your Seder. And she has this idea, I wish her luck, and we're going to help her, to get 100,000 people this April for Seders. You never know what can happen in this viral world. But because Stephanie and Peninsula, and she'd like to bring it to 6 or 8 different JCCs, and because Stephanie started getting engaged in the work, that was one of the first person I reached out to. I didn't even need to reach out to Paul. It's that we already had a relationship there, and I said, maybe this is a kind of an interesting thing that you're interested in. And it's because we got to get to know each other. There's other ideas like that, but that wouldn't have happened without J Response. And for me, again, that's maybe a 30,000-foot idea, but it's also a 3-foot issue around victims healing to do something. And that's going to be the juxtaposition and intersection of this work, I think, for time. And it's also a way that we can be engaging victims in their own healing and resilience. And I think that's going to be part of the emerging story.
I want to add something before I forget, just as for us as our jobs, just a lesson learned that I've been following the mantra. When on that Monday after the fire, Ruben, who I mentioned, was down in LA talking to our executive committee, and he said, and the head of the federation, the word, it's just, I could listen to it, was it. One of the main things that they learned is that you gotta self-care for ourselves. And he said that when we went through it a year ago, I got sick 3 times, I got the flu, I was trying to do everything, be everything to everybody, and it was a huge mistake. Because my staff got sick and it just wasn't good. So 80 days later, I haven't gotten sick, and I also, there's days where I've just like zoned out and made sure. I planned a family trip to Peru over the Christmas break. Did it. It was the best thing. I felt like I was gone for a month. My staff took care of other things. With our staff, our camp director, he also went to Hawaii with his family for a week. We kind of continued to do the things that we're doing, but also making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not being able to take care of our community and our staff and to handle the crisis. And he said to me, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So just remember that. This is going to be our lives for the next 3 to 5 plus years. We're going to be living. It's not going to change tomorrow. So just be prepared to be living in this world.
I'm just going to pull in some key points that I took away from our conversation, and then if there are any final words that either of you would like to add. I think it's important for all of us to recognize that the relationships that were built prior to any crisis were the thing that actually helped you both navigate through from your own personal point of view and then also from a community perspective. The level of preparedness on the part of your community and the thoughtfulness about that, even when they weren't necessarily directly related, but it gave you ideas about that checklist that you mentioned, Brian, of how to handle a crisis, I think would be a key document that if in some way to be able to share with all of us, God forbid we're in that situation, knowing that there's boxes to tick would help. I think another critical piece for all of us to consider was the response from all of us in both wanting to be helpful and also creating space for people, and also understanding that we feel a part of your story and we want to be a part of it, but the way that you're experiencing that story is very, very different than the way we experience that story. That's why I think it was really important for us to hear from you today. I think we could have had this conversation with Joel. I think we could have had this conversation with many of you under different circumstances in each of your situations. I personally want to share that I think one of the strongest forms that I've seen with both of you in the conversations that I've had with both of you since is your willingness to be vulnerable. And I think in leadership many times we appear that we have to be unflappable, and maybe in the moments of the crisis of whatever it was, your ability to still recognize your own vulnerability in that gave people the space to be who they needed to be. And for your staff, I'm guessing that was incredibly important. So I want to thank you for the gift of being vulnerable in front of all of us and being able to share this in a way, and for us to have an understanding that just reading it in the news or getting the email back from you doesn't tell us the story in exactly the same way. And I'd like you to have the final words to us about what you want us to remember.
So just as thinking, we were in a session with Peter yesterday about staff and quality of staff and keeping staff on too long and mediocre staff. I would say what I also learned from this situation is that we built our board over the last 13 years and they're phenomenal. Like that, without the board that I have today, like to get through this crisis, like I'm again blessings, gratitude. My staff, excellent. Some of them with us 10, 15 years, but we kind of weeded out the staff is amazing. The community, the relationships with Federation, Jewish Community Foundation, all the relationships we've developed over the years. I mean, just kind of prepared us for this moment. And we weren't there 13 years ago, but we're there today, and it's like I just have gratitude that we're on that. So it's just important board and staff in crisis. Good to have us all.
I agree with all of that, and I would say I didn't sign up for this. I don't think any of us did. But when you actually take a step back, you did sign up for this because you sort of signed up for whatever it was going to take. You just don't know what you're going to be faced with in a given day, and you learn a lot about yourself in the process. I've not been as good at self-care. That's going to come to bite me if I don't figure out a strategy for that, so I'm a little worried about it. So I think my big takeaway out of this conference, I feel I've been down here since Thursday because we had board meetings too, and my heart is sitting up north, bad weather, but up north. But at some point I have to leave, so part of that was also this leaving, part of that was the decision to sort of reframe this engagement with the association. Part of it was the motivation that our sort of mantra inside our JCC is we don't want any more damage in our community than the shooter already created. There's going to be more damage, but we want to try to limit it, and we've had to be the peacemaker on a lot of pieces, but I think that's part of it. But we'll have to get to the self-care, not just for me, but if I don't role model it, then it's not going to be good for the rest of my staff. They're working triple, quadruple duty, and I'm sure yours are too.
Yeah, and I want to end on a positive note. From the beginning, we kind of put out there our theme is ashes to blossoms, and that's been like just thematic for us. Right from the first weekend, it was just like, ooh, this is where we're going to go. And I would say like it's 80 days later, and we run programs all year round, and all of our program partners have stuck with us. So we're 90% of our programs have been placed in other places. We have a site for our summer camp on Sunday. I was on the plane here, and we had about 400 people, over 100 families that came out for our first open house at the new site. And it's extremely positive. We have a social enterprise. I did a JTalk a few years ago about our Shemesh Farm, did a social enterprise for adults with developmental disabilities. And now we're at Shemesh by the Sea. We have a partnership with Malibu Jewish Center and Synagogue, and we have a plot of land that we're now developing that's overlooking the ocean. It's an upgrade. It's actually pretty nice. So and it's a beautiful opportunity. We're creating a strategic plan with the synagogue, the JCC Synagogue Urban Farm Partnership. We're running programs at Camp Ramah, Camp Alameen, Camp Waldorf, our day camp, which is not effective. It's a day school, San Fernando Valley. I mean, everything that we're doing, religious retreats, day school retreats, we're just doing them all over the place. It's really pushed us off the mountain, and we're the JCC without walls. And it's moving forward. I think the next few weeks we're going to be completing, placing everything, and positive. My staff is moving forward, so there's good things that are going to come out of it. It's just going to be different than where we were at that time. So.
We do have a couple of minutes if anybody would like to ask a question. David.
Hi. First of all, I can't thank you enough. For me, I know that I share this with several people in the room. I don't even know how to feel right now. I think most of you know that a few of us in the room were affected by natural disasters, lost 24 people in Staten Island. But one of the things I have to say is, I'm not sure if I was able to listen to most of you said, because I realized I'm still in shock. 5 years later, I realized as I was listening to you, I felt this movie flashing in my head of all the moments in time that you just experienced and I experienced. And I'm a little numb by that right now. But one of the things I can say is that I don't know of any group of people that I feel is more prepared to face what we face together. Because the essence of what we do, from a social work point of view, from a management point of view, from a crisis management point of view, as both of you so helpfully pointed out, is it makes us incredibly prepared to face the tragedies that unfortunately hit our communities. And that's something I think we share together, something we very share, especially we share together. I'm shaken right now. I'm really shaken because I didn't realize the impact of the 5 years. I thought it was behind me. But thank you. I really appreciate being part of this conversation and hearing from you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sue?
So as many know, I, like David, was an organization impacted by Sandy, although we did, and our experience continues. I'd love to talk through more, and not today, about the expansion of what J-Response really means. Because we as a network have really been there for one another, and we need to be there for one another. But what we're also listening to is the importance of the individual organizational preparedness that each of you have reflected on. It's hard not to talk about the things we may have done wrong and to really focus on the things we did right, but we can never think big enough, and it's always a work in progress. The trauma that you've experienced, that we have experienced, that David's reflecting, changed our lives, but we have to deal with it and we need to move on. But J-Response can't be just that response when somebody else has a crisis that we were able to say, we want to help you. We need to take it as an opportunity to improve the preparedness of our own communities, our own organizations. And so I think we might want to figure out a way to think broader and bigger, and I'd love to be part of it.
Sue, I really appreciate that, and ironically, when we talked about J-Response, and Jen and I are going to try to staff that, part of based on our own experience, and it actually starts with internal preparedness, so you are completely on it, and what we're actually doing at that guidebook is before anybody can come in, you have to think about what would be if, and you're not going to be able to be prepared for everything, but if you're prepared for some things, at least then you have the beginning of your template.
And you have a mindset that
Exactly.
there's more out there than
Arnie?
First of all, thank you. Thank you not just for the presentation, but for all that you've done and all that you bring to the table on this. I ran a JCC for 30 years, and even though I'm not running a JCC anymore, we're housed in a JCC and we're building a building right next to the JCC with a connection between the two. We're also 5 minutes from the beach. So we lived through Superstorm Sandy as well. And my staff is just as vulnerable, and my community is just as vulnerable as anyone who is part of the JCC is from both natural disasters and the kind of insanity, Brian, that you and your community had to deal with. And I can't help but wonder what our responsibilities are, and if we should be taking a role in in the national debates that go on with respect to gun control and climate change. These are hard issues in communities. Communities are divided. These are hard issues for us as executives because our boards and our donor base can be very divided on this as well. How does this ever end if we don't end it somehow? And where is our voice, and what, if any, is the responsibility of the national organization that represents us all to be pushing an agenda forward that tries to at least mitigate some of this insanity that's going on in our country?
Anybody else? Question, comment, thought? I'm just gonna deal with some program notes and then we can wrap things up. When you're finished with our conversation now, lunch will be served in North A and B on the second floor, so that's an important thing, so in case you're hungry. I think for me, the thing that, based on everything all of you said, and mostly what the two of you shared, the piece of wisdom that keeps popping in my head is, if not now, when? Because all of this preparedness, all of these relationships, the building of your board, the taking care of your staff, the taking care of yourselves, the taking care of yourself, there's not a time in which you have to take for granted. And I think all of us have a responsibility to each other in supporting the idea that if there's knowledge to be shared or support to be given, there's no other time to do that than now. So thank you for creating a space for this conversation and listening intently. It was fascinating to watch all of you not be on your cell phones and be deeply engaged and leaning into this conversation. So thank you for that, and thank you guys for that.
And for what we did not cover, if you have a question that is answered, as far as I'm concerned, there's no boundaries. If I can't answer it, I won't answer it. But if there's something that you have a question about, don't be shy. I think part of dealing with it is actually talking about it. This is an incredibly friendly audience, but it's also a painful audience. So I'm shaking too, David, because as I said before, when you're in the moment, you just go into autopilot. We're 3 months in. Now we're thinking about it. It's harder now.